America is on alert. America is on alert because from Venezuela to the Pacific is the U.S. quietly preparing for war. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you that while the United States might not be at war with these countries that it's pretending to be at war with, I think that the U.S. is at war, but it's preparing for some sort of conflict at the very least, and it's what's also doing is basically projecting its influence and projecting the fact that it's not going to be messed with. That's what it's doing. And obviously, you need to use someone to do this, right? You need to be able to actually pick someone that you could actually test your theories, test your deployment, test your ability to communicate, right? This is because this is what's happening right now, right? What they're doing with Venezuela, what they're doing in the Caribbean, the killing of these drug dealers or these boats and the explosions and getting very close to Venezuela and doing a bunch of other things, and which I will discuss. Basically, what you're seeing is that the U.S. is getting ready, or at the very least, is preparing to project a fair amount of fear mongering, right? What does that mean? Well, it basically means that it's getting ready. Don't forget, everybody kind of made a little deal about the fact that the U.S. was essentially changing its, the Defense Department to the War Department. Yeah, the Department of Defense, Department of War. People kind of say, well, what do you mean? When was the last time you actually won a war? But be careful. This is part of a very systematic, and one thing you will note about this administration, it does not give up. It keeps on plucking away until it gets what it wants. You may like it, you may agree with it, you may like it, you may agree with it, but the point is that they are going to get through with it. So let's dive into this question that makes headlines, raising eyebrows and stirring quite concern across the world. What is the U.S. doing? Is the United States preparing quietly for war? Maybe not a declared one, but a slow, methodical positioning that spans the Caribbean. And now we'll tell you what happened to the guy in charge of the Caribbean for the U.S. He didn't last too long. Didn't like what was going on. The Pacific and even the domestic defense sector. Because also the Department of the U.S. administration is also pushing very hard on defense contractors to produce more weapon more quickly. It's going out of its way to get these rare minerals used in weapons. Why do you think it's doing that? It's doing that because you need them for weapons. The pieces are there. The pieces are there for you to see. The pieces are there for you to understand. You might want to see it, you might not want to see it, but it's there. So let's take a look closely as the pieces are starting to line up. Do not take this for granted. Do not think that this is like, oh, this is ridiculous what they're doing. No, these are grown-up people. They know what they're doing. Now, is it the right thing or the wrong thing is a different topic, but the point is, over the past few months, U.S. warships, submarines, and stealth aircraft, they have deployed the stealth aircraft, right? Have moved into position near Venezuela's coast. What are you going to invade Venezuela? I don't think so. I don't think that they want to invade Venezuela, but they want to make it for real. They want to start positioning the ships, the submarine, the aircraft to see how we coordinate, how we communicate with each other, because they haven't done that in a long time. And what best when to do it in a quasi-war? And frankly, what is Venezuela going to do about it? Right? So Washington calls it an anti-narcotics campaign. This is brilliant if you think about it. Right? They're using a bunch of drug dealers as a mean for them to test their weaponry, as a mean to test their communications, as a mean to test their resolve and how to put the pieces together, and more important, to see who is going to play ball with them within the War Department or the Defense Department. So they're basically targeting narco-boats. Practice target practice, essentially. Of course, you got to wonder, but hold on a second here. I mean, are you sure these are all drug dealers? Maybe there's a civilian in there somehow. Shouldn't you kind of arrest them, put them through the process? No, we're just bombing out of the water. So the hardware, the hardware says something different. There's advanced F-35 fighters, amphibious ready groups, marine expeditionary units. For a bunch of drug dealers? This is not a drug bust. That is power projection. So in early September, the U.S. Navy carried out a kinetic strike on a Venezuelan vessel. 11 people were killed. That's when it started. So the White House basically framed it as self-defense. Caracas called it an act of war. But what are they going to do about it? I mean, Maduro from Venezuela, the president, immediately placed his military on maximum alert. He said, you stop doing that, accusing Washington of violating its sovereignty. And just days later, U.S. Southern Command, the command responsible for all Operation Latin America and Caribbean, suddenly lost its leader. He retired early. You know what happened, right? He went in there and said, what are you guys doing? I mean, Alvin Osley, the admiral, basically stepped down after less than a year. He retired, quote unquote. You know what that means. So unofficially, reports say there was serious tension between Osley and the defense secretary, and over how far these missions should go. What are you doing? So what's really going on? What is really going on? What is at stake? That is what you need to ask yourself. That's a question you need to ask yourself, right? So what's going on? Well, officially, the U.S. insists this is about combating drug trafficking. I maintain they are target practice, and they're getting ready for whatever else is coming new next, although you really can't practice with Venezuela. But I think more importantly, they are positioning themselves as showing to whomever they think that they're talking to, do not mess around with us for real. It's a way to erase regional intervention under the cover of counter-narcotics. And if you trace the pattern, the Caribbean is becoming a live fire training ground for modern hybrid warfare. Covered ops, drone surveillance, legal justification built around non-state actors. I'm not attacking Venezuela. I'm attacking drug dealers. Meanwhile, Washington is quietly coordinating logistics for nearby bases in Puerto Rico, Guantanamo, and even part of Florida under the broader banner of readiness. It's not an invasion, but it's a rehearsal. So if you zoom out, while the Caribbean heats up, the Pentagon, forget the Caribbean, the Pentagon is conducting large-scale war games around the world. Now, having said that, I have to say that the U.S. is not the only one doing that, right? I mean, we've got China that has been practicing with Russia, right? So this is not on their own. But in the Pacific, they call the Talisman Sabre 2025, brought together 19 nations and over 35,000 troops, the largest ever in the Indo-Pacific. In Europe, Defender 25 is strengthening joint operation from Guatemala to Honduras. Everywhere you look, there's a simulation, a drill or deployment. So each one is labeled a routine. Each one yearly focused on real-world flashpoints from the South China Sea to Eastern Europe to the Caribbean. It's as if the Pentagon is stress testing every possible battlefield scenario simultaneously. So why is this all happening at once? Right? This just happened, starting since September, quite frankly. Well, first, deterrence. The U.S. wants adversaries, especially China, Russia, Venezuela, to see its readiness and think twice about testing limits. 2, political signaling. What do we mean by that? Well, domestically, it projects strength, unity, and preparedness, especially useful during election cycles, which coming up in the U.S., and congressional budget debates. And third, economic momentum. War games and deployments feed the defense industrial engine. New contracts, production orders, and modernization cycles. We're spending money here, folks. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics all stand to benefit as readiness levels rise. Remember, during the Vietnam War, when the U.S. went to quote-unquote war, right, in Vietnam, a lot of money was spent. In fact, so much money was spent that you actually created quite a bit of inflation because of that. And after that, obviously, what happened is Nixon did not want to lower rates. He wanted to lower rates as opposed to raise rates to stop inflation, and that caused the mayhem that it caused in the 80s with a huge amount of inflation. But the point is you have to be careful because these have impacts on everything that you're living around. So it's about power, both hard and soft. Now, where is this going to take us? Well, does this mean that the U.S. is about to enter multiple wars? Not necessarily, but it does mean that Washington is keeping its powder dry and its forces mobile. It's building optionality. That's what they're doing. The ability to act fast if or when a crisis erupts. Of course, why? But why do you need to do that? Well, the world is changing. The world is becoming a lot more polarized. And make no mistake, the flexibility is power. Every exercise sharpens coordination. Every deployment tests logistics. And every commander change signals intent. Together, they paint a picture of a country that's not just about defending peace, but preparing for the possibility that peace may not last. Are we saying war? Well, we're not saying war. We're saying we're getting ready for anything that comes next. So when you hear the U.S. has launched another joint exercises, or replaced a regional commander, or position a carrier group, remember that each move fits into a global chessboard. Imagine fighting fascists in World War II. Incredible. Very nice, very nice. So, but the point is this a new era of readiness or the prelude to something far more dangerous? I mean, things can happen. Just because they don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not happening. So we have to be very, very careful. And obviously, we need to understand what's going on. So what's happening? Well, these are some of the concrete developments that support the idea of increased U.S. military readiness and activity. First, the U.S. has deployed multiple warships, a nuclear submarine, and an amphibious ready group off Venezuela coast. Literally. I mean, what are we fighting here, right? They're going to say, ooh, look, they're going to invade Venezuela. No, they're not going to. The U.S. is not going to invade Venezuela the same way Russia is not going to invade Europe. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel because I am all about looking for the black swan. I am all about looking for these events that are going to impact geopolitical events or stock market events that are going to impact your job. It's going to impact the market. It's going to impact, the country in many ways. The security that we've gotten accustomed to. So the U.S., believe it or not, the U.S. deployed F-35 stealth fighters to Puerto Rico as part of an operation against alleged narco-trafficking tied to Venezuela. You have to understand that these people do not play chess, right? They want to win at chess. They don't want to play checkers. They want to play chess. Three-dimensional chess. So whatever move that they're showing you, and then you think you understand, that is not what they're doing. Okay? U.S. forces have made strikes on vessels alleged to be narcotic traffickers coming from or connected to Venezuela. Well, obviously that's an easy thing to do because they all come from there. Okay. The U.S. administration has described the campaign as part of a non-international armed conflict with unlawful combatants, i.e. drug dealers, U.S. officials have made statement to the effect that operation may be beyond mere narcotics interdiction. Right? The U.S. has characterized some Venezuelan entities as linked to narco trafficking and therefore national security threat. Venezuela president has stated the country is at a maximum preparedness. He said, well, what are you doing? Analysts note that Venezuela's military is weakened by economy and corruption, which matters strategically. This is a danger. The same way the U.S. is using the fact that they are taxing certain countries on steel for the cars and things like that because they can do it and it's legal. That is legal as long as it's because of threats to the country. They're using the same thing as, we need to practice. And in order for us to practice, what we're going to do is we're going to say this country is threatening us, so we're going to practice against that country. While it did not, there's no specific public document called Defense Company Push. In U.S. City directly tied to the Venezuelan operation, many of the activities imply high demand for utilization of defense industry capabilities. So there's no credible substantial evidence, right, that new U.S. domestic military deployment in U.S. cities. They're not sending armies in the cities. What they are doing, though, they're sending the National Guard. It started with that, right? And then they realized, let's push this further. Let's push it. Let's do more. I mean, the legal and constitutional issue would be different if U.S. cities were being militarized for an external war. But that's not the fact. That's not the case right now. So, why this does not necessarily mean this is a full-scale war, right? Well, first of all, the ambiguity of the objective. The U.S. frames its operations as counter-narcotics. However, regime change appears in the subtext. But that's the people against this bring it to your attention, say, hey, look what they're doing. They want to take over Venezuela. Now, that is not what they're doing. So don't listen to that part. Listen to the first part, which is basically you attacking a foreign country. Or you're bombing people in the water. They might or might not be narcotics. From a legal constitutional constraint, the U.S. involvement inside another sovereign state territory, Venezuela, raises major question of international law. The U.S. War Powers Clause, congressional authorization, and some members of Congress are raising concern. What's happening here also that you need to be concerned about is that, they are pushing the envelope. And obviously, nobody's pushing back. The Democrats are squandered all over the place. And the Republicans, basically, they tend to vote as a bloc. And they're not really, they're starting to complain, but they're not pushing back that strong. Some of the presidential statements are conflicting. For example, President Trump recently denied considering strikes within Venezuela, despite the buildup suggesting the opposite. The deployment of carriers, marines, ships is substantial, yet whether the intent is full invasion or more limited precision operations is uncertain. So, yes, the U.S. is preparing. And positioning for potential serious military action. It's a combination of anti-narcotic operation, expeditionary forces, naval task groups. But whether this rise to war in the sense of a full-scale conventional invasion remains open, and I don't think that's a case. Okay? The language of war is being used all over the place, but the action is far more limited and somewhat ambiguous. What you're seeing essentially is the fact that the U.S. is getting ready for something. The U.S. is preparing itself, and that is what you need to worry about. From a strategic project management perspective, this means we are in a pre-war or escalation phase scenario. High readiness, significant deployment, strong signaling, but not full-blown war. So when we see the Department of War, the defense industry and deployment side is active. The U.S. cities of war with Venezuela is not showing evidence, but it is forming. So what happened with that guy when they decided, hey, we're gonna take your people and we're gonna the commander of the U.S. Southern Command, which oversees Alvin Osley, which oversees U.S. military operations in Latin America and the Caribbean, will retire at the end of 2025. He became commander in November 2024, and less than a year later, the retirement announcement was made. So what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what. What I will tell you that what's going to happen is this. There was a Navy captain in charge of operation in South America, retiring just a couple of weeks ago. That's the one I'm talking about. What does that mean? Well, as I've said the same thing that what kind of I'm saying right now is, are we getting ready for war? But we do that all the time. You know, that's what we call training. But by bombing these people out of the water, moving that kind of equipment, because don't forget, yeah, it may make sense because you want to prepare yourself, right? But don't forget, the enemies are watching what you're doing. They also see how you are moving your assets, and they're learning from that. And that's what you need to worry about, right? So he probably said to them, listen, first of all, why are we bombing people out of the water? Why are we moving all these elements all over the place? And obviously, they probably moved it against his will or his decision. And I don't think he wanted to do that. Either because it felt it wasn't necessary, you're kind of pushing the envelope. You could start something that you can't control. So he became commander in November 2024. His name is Alvin Osley. The announcement came amid escalating U.S. military activity in the Caribbean. The Pentagon, and this is where you got to wonder what's going on, but basically the Pentagon did not publicly give a detailed reason, but reporting suggests that there were tension between the two of them. Obviously, and a big accent, I mean, nice guy and all, but he's, he came in and he says, we have to stop this and we have to, project power, and we have to let everyone know that we mean business, and we have to start doing something. And we want to also test to make sure who is with us and who is against us. And obviously you're against us because you don't agree, so you got to go. But since you didn't do anything wrong, we're going to retire you. We're not going to fire you. That would be too much. So Admiral Alvin Osley, the head of U.S. Southern Command in Latin America and the Caribbean, was abruptly replaced in mid-October 2025. After less than a year, the move follows a series of controversial U.S. what we call kinetic strikes. Alleged Venezuelan drug trafficking boats that killed several crew members. So multiple outlets reported that tension arose between the defense secretary and the general and the admiral, and whether the strikes had proper legal and operational authorization. Within days, the Pentagon said the deputy commander would take over in acting capacity. SouthernCom is the nerve center of all U.S. activity in the Caribbean, including the current escalation. Replacing its top commander during active operations suggests policy friction or accelerated operational tempo. I mean, if you're going to have a problem with someone, well, let's test it while we don't need to actually test it. You don't want to do it in the middle of the war. It's often a sign that Washington is tightening civilian control before widening or formalizing missions. You want to make sure I mean, technically the Army is supposed to say, when you say jump, you say how high. But in this case, you say, whoa, hold on. I'm not jumping. Okay, you're killing people in the middle of the ocean for no reason. I don't know, something to that effect. Say, well, you're replaced. You're supposed to just obey what and you want to make sure you got, this is part of the training that they're doing. This is part of what they're doing. They want to know, if we have to go to war with someone, do we have the people to help us? Because don't forget one thing. The U.S., to be frank, has not won a war in a long time. The Korean War was not a war. Vietnam War wasn't really a war, I mean, officially. The last one was World War II. A bona fide war. And that's the last time the U.S. won a war. You think you want to? You get a bunch of weapons, a bunch of people. I say go and fight. No, you got to coordinate. You got to talk, especially with AI. And don't forget what right now what Russia is doing with the cutting of the cable under the ocean. Like take a look at that video that I did, and the drones and the cyber warfare. This is going to be extremely complicated. If you're going to do something, if you're going to do something bad, something straightforward, you want to make sure your commanders are with you, rightfully or wrongfully. They have to be with you. In this case, this guy wasn't. So they replaced him. So historically, such leadership change can precede either a broadening of operations or containment strategy. He said, listen, I don't know. I mean, if he said no, I'm sure a bunch of people underneath him said also no. This could be something at some point. So do we need to worry about that? But what is clearly happening, and forget the Caribbean for a second, they are very precise major exercises. War game. The Talisman Sabre 2025, a huge joint exercise between the US, Australia, and the Indo-Pacific. More than 35,000 personnel from 19 nations were involved. 2025. Defender 25, a major US Army exercise focused on rapidly deploying troops and equipment in Europe. Santam Guardian 2025, a US-hosted multinational exercise in Central America, co-hosted by the US Southern Command in Guatemala, involving security military forces of multiple nations. Various war games at the strategic level. Power Game 2025, hosted by the US Air Force War Game Institute. You may or may not have heard of it. This is just not independently. This is a coordinated effort. U.S. military exercises intended to project force, increase readiness, integrate with allies, and practice rapid dispersal deployment across wide geography. So what does that mean? Well, it means that first of all, you need to display readiness and deterrence. The U.S. is clearly using these exercises not just for basic training, but to demonstrate capability. Many of the exercise announcements explicitly tie the drills to potential threats. For instance, Talisman Sabre has been interpreted by analysts as a rehearsal for possible conflict scenario with China. And don't forget, if this thing with China actually explodes, this is going to be a major China. The U.S. right now has potentially 1 week worth of supplies in terms of missiles. China is going to be a tough nut to crack if you ever get there. And you don't want a general to say to you, well, I don't know, should we really do this? I mean, some exercises could serve multiple purposes: signaling, alliance cohesion, training, not purely preparing for war. So basically, the U.S. is playing war game. And yes, the U.S. has sent most of its missiles to Israel because it was complacent. What I mean by complacent is, yes, you needed to help Israel at that time, as per commitment. But, they kept on doing it, and it went on for 2 years. That's a lot of weapons. And then, of course, you also send missiles. If you started, in fact, they wanted to send the Tomahawk over to Ukraine. The U.S. is not an open-ended... right? There's $37 trillion in debt. Can't afford to do that anymore. So yes, it should help, but that's enough. And it needs to replenish its supply. But I will tell you, those missiles, what do you need to build those missiles? You need rare earth mineral. And who's got the rare earth minerals and doesn't want to give it to you? China. It all fits together perfectly. So the U.S. is saying, listen, no. First of all, you got to stop this war in Gaza. That's what they brought now in the U.S. and say, okay, that's it. Because you're starting to bomb Qatar, right? And we can't support you anymore. So you stop, we do a war, that's it. We do a peace, and we'll talk about if there's a real peace treaty or temporary hold. We do a peace treaty and we stop. This is it. We have enough. Russia is also seizing rare earth minerals mines in Ukraine. Yes, of course, they want to do both. Because they also need missiles. And be careful, Russia's missiles are getting fancier and harder to detect. So everybody is kind of racing to the top or racing to the bottom, whichever way you look at it. But this is a very serious situation. And they're all going at the same time. So, my friend, what does this mean? What are the implications of all these activities? Implications are fairly straightforward. The US is getting ready. The US is projecting strength. Why? Haven't you read the news? Haven't you seen what's happening? Have you seen that Russia and China and even India got together? Have you seen that China and India have manned fences? They are trading with each other. They have stopped fighting with each other. Have you seen that Russia and China are conducting joint military exercises? Have you seen or heard the head of NATO himself has said that Russia is someone to contend with, that NATO is no match for Russia, believe it or not. Yeah, there's lots of soldiers in NATO. Yeah. But they're not ready to fight. Russia is a war economy. They've been fighting for almost 3 years. I mean, they are producing more weapons, more ammunitions than NATO combined. Yes, the US is still someone to contend with. I'm not saying the US is losing out. But careful. You could have lots of weapons, lots of guns. You have to know how to use it. You have to know how to cooperate. You have to know how to talk to your people. You have to have the correct command and control in order to manage a war. When everything starts blowing up everywhere, that is not the time to figure out you don't have enough weapon or they're not listening because they don't like Trump or they don't like this one, they don't like that one. That is not the time to find out these things. Because just as China, right, has been preparing for years since 2020 from an industrial point of view, right? They have been building, they have been creating, they have been inventing. Now, they're not just making socks and shoes anymore. In fact, the biotech industry in China is getting quite close. It may have its what we call its deep-seek moment versus the U.S. The U.S. does not make enough rare earth minerals. The U.S. doesn't make its own pharmaceutical products. Doesn't build enough missiles. Be careful. The UK is seeing less people sign up for the military. Nobody wants to go to war. But yet, let me tell you, if you're in Europe right now, and if you're in Finland or Copenhagen, not too long ago, there were a bunch of drones, although we haven't heard from it for a while now, but there were a bunch of drones flying around the airport and didn't know where they came from. I mean, some of them actually went into Poland. Some of them went to a bunch of countries. They found a boat in France in the water that was spying, or they didn't know what he was doing. Some of those boats actually went underground near Finland and cut. Take a look at my live that I did on that. They cut some of the cable underneath the water. How do you think communication travels back and forth, internet communication, in addition to gas? Under the water. Someone cut them off. Well, at least someone is, well, they did cut them off, but they're also scoping to figure out exactly where are the communication. When the moment happens and something does happen, you cut them all off and they're all disconnected. How are you going to communicate? What do you think the U.S. is doing right now in Venezuela? What do you think it's doing right now in Caribbean? How do we communicate with each other in case there is no cable, in case we can't communicate anymore, in case everything is blowing up everywhere? What do? We need to find a way to fight. And that's what they're doing. They're doing it their way in the U.S. Russia is doing its own way over there in Europe with the drones, with what they call the shadow fleet. A bunch of Russian, well, they don't fly on the Russian flag, but a bunch of Russian boats running around, doing all knows what, scoping, figure out what everyone else is doing. What is NATO doing? Stop that. Stop doing what you're doing. Did they blow up any plane? Did they stop any boat? Not really. They're saying stop. I mean, if it was the U.S., it would be a different story. But here, they had even planes, I mean, fighter planes flying over Poland. And what did they do when they had that, and when they had some of the they had some of their ships, some of their what do you call I think they had some drones. So they sent a couple of, like, 19 drones, and they sent 3 planes out. But be careful. Those planes are multi-million-dollar planes that you're flying around to counteract with $10,000 drones. Right? That's great. That's great, because you could see how they're reacting, and you could see they can't stop the drones, and you could see that they are poorly equipped to face up to the situation. So therefore, pay close attention what happens next, because that might not be the end of it. And we need to always make sure we understand what's happening.